There's a silence that falls after a funeral that is unlike any other. It isn't peaceful. It's heavy, weighted with unspoken words and the suffocating presence of what's been lost. For me, that silence was the sound of my husband Robert's coffin being lowered into the earth. A solid, final thud that seemed to punctuate the end of my world. 40 years of partnership, of shared laughter over morning coffee, of quiet understanding in the face of life's storms, all sealed away under 6 feet of cold, unforgiving soil. I thought that was the most profound betrayal silence could ever hold. I was wrong. The true betrayal came just hours later, wrapped in the guise of concern, delivered with the voice of my only son, Mark. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes it just carries poison more efficiently. My son and his wife, Candace, believed they were tidying up a loose end, dealing with the inconvenient relic of a life that was now over. They thought they were burying a problem when they drove me away from the home I had built, but they were really just planting a seed. And they had absolutely no idea what kind of harvest they were about to reap. If you've ever been made to feel small, to feel like a chapter in someone else's story that has finally ended, then stick with me. Subscribe to this channel, and let me tell you how I reclaimed not just a house, but an entire life they had already written off. The drive after the reception was a blur of grey landscapes and the monotonous hum of the luxury car's engine. Candace sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by its cold, blue light. Her designer black dress probably cost more than my first car. Her grief, I noted with a detached sort of clarity, had been performative and fleeting, a perfectly executed piece of social theatre for the benefit of our friends and family at the service. Mark drove, his hands gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his expression a careful mixture of pity and resolve. "Just a little farther, Mom," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I want to show you something. A place you can have some peace and quiet. Get away from all the memories for a bit," I nodded, too numb with grief to question him. The memories were a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, and the idea of escaping them, even for a moment, seemed like a mercy. I closed my eyes, picturing Robert's face, the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled. We were supposed to be in Italy right now. A trip we'd postponed for decades, always waiting for the right time. First, it was waiting for Mark to finish college. Then it was waiting for the business to be more secure. Then, for Mark to be settled in his career, a career we funded. The right time never came. Instead, a heart attack did. The car turned off the main highway, then onto a smaller paved road, and finally, onto a gravel track that jostled my bones. The manicured suburbs gave way to dense, untamed forest. "Where are we going, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A flicker of something, maybe annoyance, crossed his face in the mirror before being replaced by that same placid mask of concern. "It's a surprise, Mom. A good one. It's for the best." The car came to a stop in a small, overgrown clearing. Before us stood a structure I hadn't seen in 30 years. The old hunting cabin. Robert's grandfather had built it, and it had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. Moss grew in thick, verdant patches over the rotting timbers of the porch. A shutter hung from a single hinge, banging softly against the wall in the breeze. It wasn't a place of peace. It was a place of decay. Mark got out and opened my door. "Here we are," he announced, a touch of finality in his tone. He pulled my single suitcase from the trunk, a small bag I'd packed for what I thought would be a night or two at his house. He set it on the ground next to me. I looked from the dilapidated cabin to my son's face, and the fog of my grief began to part, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Mark, what is this?" Candace got out of the car then, walking around to stand beside him. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was looking at the cabin with an expression of faint disgust. Mark thought, and I agree, she said, her voice syrupy sweet, that the big house is just too much for you now, Eleanor. The upkeep, the memories, it's a burden. This is simpler. More manageable. I stared at them, the words failing to connect into a coherent meaning. Simpler. Manageable. It was a ruin. I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling. Mark sighed, the patient sound of a parent explaining something obvious to a difficult child. Mom? This is your new home. The words hung in the air between us, stark and unbelievable. He said them so casually, as if he were telling me dinner was ready. My new home. He gestured to the cabin. We'll have some groceries delivered once a week. Your pension and social security will be more than enough for your needs out here. It's quiet. You can read. Rest. It's what Dad would have wanted. For you to be safe and without stress. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. It was a cold, dry press of lips, devoid of any warmth. We'll come visit when we can, he lied. We love you. And with that, he and Candace got back in their car, the engine roaring to life, shattering the stillness. They didn't look back as they drove away, gravel spitting from beneath their tires. I was left standing there, my small suitcase at my feet, watching their taillights disappear down the dirt track, swallowed by the forest. The silence that fell then was different. It wasn't the heavy silence of grief. It was the vast, empty silence of absolute abandonment. I was 59 years old, a new widow, and my son had just left me to rot. Standing in that desolate clearing, the chill of the evening air seeping into my bones, my mind refused to stay in the horrifying present. It recoiled, seeking refuge in the past, searching for the path that had led me to this unbelievable moment. It wasn't a singular misstep, I realized, but a lifetime of small, imperceptible erosions of self. A million tiny sacrifices laid at the altar of my family, each one seeming so reasonable at the time, but which, taken together, had paved this very road to my own dispossession. My thoughts drifted back to a small, sunlit kitchen 35 years ago. A younger version of me, flour on my apron, was holding a rejection letter from a prestigious architectural program. I had a talent for design, a passion for creating spaces that were both beautiful and functional. Robert had come in, wrapped his arms around me, and read the letter over my shoulder. It's okay, Ellie, he'd said. You can apply again next year. But Mark was a toddler then, a whirlwind of energy, and Robert's fledgling construction business was demanding all of his time and every spare penny we had. I had looked at my son's smiling face and my husband's tired one, and I'd made a choice. I folded the letter, and my dream, and put it away in a box. I became the company's unpaid bookkeeper, the logistics manager, the late-night strategist, the one who made sure the house ran like a well-oiled machine so Robert could focus on building his empire. It was supposed to be our empire. That was the story we told ourselves. Once the business is stable, we'd say, we'll hire a proper office manager, and you can go back to school. Then it became, once Mark is in high school, and then, once he's through college, the finish line kept moving, and I kept running towards it, never realizing I was on a treadmill. I remembered the late nights, poring over invoices and payroll while Robert was out on a job site. It was me who found the accounting error that saved the company from bankruptcy in its 5th year. It was me who suggested we diversify into commercial properties, a move that tripled our net worth in a decade. My name was never on the letterhead. My title was always just Mom, or Robert's wife. My contributions were absorbed into the fabric of the family, becoming as invisible and as essential as the air we breathed. And I let it happen. I took my pride in our shared success, never thinking to claim a piece of it for myself. Then came the evening Robert came home with 2 leather-bound portfolios. He sat me down at the dining room table, his expression serious. Ellie, he'd said, my father trusted my mother with everything, and when he died, his brothers used some legal loophole to take the business from her. She ended up with almost nothing. I will not let that happen to you. He opened the portfolios. He had spent the last year working with our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, to create a series of trusts and holding companies. He had systematically been moving our most valuable, liquid assets, stocks, bonds, a diversified portfolio of investments, into a separate entity. A secret garden, he called it. He'd made me sign papers I barely understood at the time, his hand guiding mine. This is all in your name, Ellie. Solely. Not ours. Yours. The house, the investment accounts, even a majority share of the business itself. If anything ever happens to me, you are the fortress. Mark will inherit a handsome salary and a minority stake, enough to live well, but you hold the keys to the kingdom. You are the final say, I had protested, feeling it was somehow morbid, somehow a betrayal of our partnership. It's not about trust, Robert, I'd argued. It's about Mark. He's our son. Robert had looked at me, his gaze firm. I love our son. But I've seen what grief and entitlement can do to a person. This is my final gift to you, Ellie. The gift of security. The gift of choice. Promise me you'll never forget you hold the power. I promised. And then, in the day-to-day bustle of life, I had forgotten. Not the existence of the portfolio, but the power he said it held. It was just a safety net, a theoretical concept. My real life was making sure Mark had his tuition paid, helping him and Candace with the down payment on their first home, a home far grander than the one Robert and I had started in. I remembered Candace's casual remarks over family dinners. Oh, Eleanor, you should really think about updating this kitchen. It's so dated. Or, are you sure you want to be managing all this by yourself? The finances must be so confusing for you. It was a slow, deliberate campaign to frame me as a doddering, slightly incompetent old woman, unable to manage her own affairs. They would talk about me in the third person while I was sitting right there at the table. We need to make sure Mom is taken care of, Mark would say to Candace, as if I were a piece of fragile china. They weren't seeing a person anymore. They were seeing an estate. They were seeing a collection of assets attached to an inconveniently living person. They saw the big house, the business, the perceived wealth of their father, and they saw me as the sole obstacle standing between them and the life of effortless luxury they felt they deserved. All those years I had poured my energy into them, they had not seen it as love or sacrifice. They had seen it as their due. My support was not a gift, it was an infrastructure they had been built upon, and now that the primary architect, Robert, was gone, they had decided the infrastructure was theirs to dismantle for spare parts. Standing there in the cold, the memory of Robert's words came back to me, not as a distant echo, but as a clear, clarion call. You are the fortress. You hold the keys. They thought they had locked me away. They had no idea, they had just handed me the one thing I needed to remember who I was, the key to my own cage. The first night in that cabin was the longest of my life. The darkness was absolute, a thick, inky blanket that swallowed sound and light. The only noise was the mournful sigh of the wind through the cracks in the walls and the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the dusty, moth-eaten mattress, my small suitcase unopened beside me, and I let the full weight of my new reality crush me. Grief is a strange and multifaceted beast. In the first hours after Robert's funeral, my grief was for him, for the life we'd lost, for the future that had been stolen from us. But in the suffocating silence of that cabin, a new grief began to bloom, sharp and poisonous. It was grief for my son. Not the man who had driven away leaving me to fend for myself, but the little boy I had raised, the child I had loved with every fiber of my being. I grieved for the loss of the illusion that my love had been enough to forge him into a good man. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, the cold, calculated abandonment, but in the complete erasure of me as a person. To him, I was no longer a mother who was hurting. I was a problem to be managed, a logistical inconvenience to be stored out of sight. That realization was a cold plunge into an icy sea. It shocked the numbness right out of me. As the first pale, grey light of dawn filtered through the grimy window panes, something inside me shifted. The tears stopped. The trembling ceased. The crushing weight on my chest began to feel less like despair and more like pressure, the kind of pressure that turns carbon into diamond. I stood up, my joints stiff from the cold and the long, sleepless vigil. I looked around the single, squalid room. Dust lay thick on every surface. Cobwebs draped the corners like macabre decorations. The air was stale with the smell of mildew and forgotten things. This was the value they had placed on me. This was the sum of my 40 years of devotion. This was their final word on who I was. And in that moment, I decided it would not be mine. A quiet, cold fury began to burn where the grief had been. It wasn't a hot, raging fire, but a low, steady, blue flame of pure resolve. I would not cry. I would not crumble. I would not become the helpless old woman they believed me to be. They had made a critical miscalculation. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my quiet nature for a lack of intelligence, and my grief for an opportunity. They had forgotten who balanced the books for 30 years. They had forgotten who negotiated with suppliers when Robert was too proud. They had forgotten who had held the family and the business together through every storm. They had forgotten who Robert had trusted with everything. I walked to my suitcase and opened it. They had packed for me, or rather, Candace had. Sensible, drab clothing. Things an old woman would wear. A romance novel. Knitting needles. It was a caricature of a person, a pre-packaged identity for the woman they wanted me to become. Buried at the bottom, however, was my purse. And inside my purse was my phone. I pulled it out. The battery was at 43%. I held my breath and watched the top corner of the screen. No service. Of course. They would have thought of that. But I am not my son. I do not give up so easily. I began to move methodically through the small cabin, holding the phone aloft. I was no longer a victim surveying her prison. I was an analyst searching for a weakness in the system. I tried the main room, the small, filthy bathroom, the closet that smelled of dead mice. Nothing. Finally, I stood by the grimy window that faced north, the one with the broken shutter. And there, for a fleeting second, a single, beautiful bar of service appeared on the screen. It flickered, then held steady. It was weak, but it was there. My heart gave a powerful thump, not of fear, but of triumph. It was all I needed. I knew I couldn't risk calling Mark or any family. They would see it as a plea for help, confirmation that their plan was working, that I was desperate and ready to accept my fate. My mind raced, scrolling through a mental Rolodex of numbers I hadn't needed to recall in years. There was only one person to call. The architect of my fortress. The one man Robert trusted as much as he trusted me. I braced myself against the wall, held the phone perfectly still in that one magical spot, and with a steady finger, I dialed the private number of Arthur Henderson, our lawyer, our friend. The phone rang once. Twice. And then, a familiar, calm voice answered. Henderson. I took a deep, steadying breath. The time for being Eleanor, the grieving widow, was over. It was time to be Eleanor, the fortress. Arthur, I said, my voice clear and completely devoid of the panic he must have expected. It's Eleanor Vance. I have a situation, and I require your services. Arthur Henderson's voice on the other end of the line was a lifeline to a world I thought I had been permanently exiled from. It was a voice of reason, of competence, of unwavering loyalty. Eleanor. My God, where are you? I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Mark told everyone you'd gone to a wellness retreat to grieve in private. It didn't sound like you, the lie was so audacious, so perfectly crafted to paint them as caring and me as fragile, that I almost had to admire its Machiavellian brilliance. A wellness retreat, they had likely already shared this compassionate fiction with friends and concerned family, building a wall of public opinion around their monstrous deed. "I'm not at a retreat, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice level. "Mark and Candace drove me to the old hunting cabin on the North Acreage yesterday, after the funeral. They informed me that it is my new permanent residence and left me here." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a profound silence that stretched for a full 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, the warmth was gone from his voice, replaced by a cold, controlled anger that was far more terrifying than any shouting could have been. "Say that again, Eleanor," I repeated my statement, word for word, like a witness giving testimony. I described the car ride, the chilling pronouncement, the state of the cabin. I gave him facts, unadorned with emotion. I was building a case, and hysteria had no place in it. "The boy has lost his mind," Arthur muttered, more to himself than to me. "He's always been entitled, but this is beyond the pale. Are you all right? Are you safe?" "I am physically unharmed," I replied. "But I am finished being a victim. Arthur, Robert told me things. He made me sign papers years ago. He called it the fortress. He said I held the keys. I need to know, right now, was he speaking poetically, or was he being literal?" Arthur was quiet again for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp, legal mind. "Robert," he said, a note of deep respect in his voice, "was the most literal, and most prescient, man I have ever known. He wasn't speaking in metaphors, Eleanor. He was stating a legal fact. Your son is in for a rather rude awakening. He seems to be operating under the assumption that he is his father's heir. He is, but only in the most minor sense. You, my dear, are his father's successor." And then, Arthur began to lay it all out for me, the full scope of Robert's brilliant, posthumous protection plan. The family home was not in a trust or jointly owned, the deed was exclusively in my name, transferred years ago. The vast investment portfolio, the secret garden, was held in a holding company of which I was the sole director and shareholder. It was untouchable by anyone else. Most critically, while Mark held the title of president at Vance Construction, his father had retained a 51% majority share of the company's voting stock, and that stock had been placed in a private trust to which I was the sole trustee and beneficiary. Mark owned a significant, but non-controlling, 25% of the company. He was, in effect, a highly paid employee who had the illusion of being the owner. He had a seat at the table, but I was the one who owned the entire room. As Arthur spoke, I felt a strength flowing back into me, a sense of power I hadn't felt in decades. Robert's love hadn't just been in his hugs and his smiles, it was in his foresight, in his fierce determination to protect me even from beyond the grave. He hadn't just left me a fortress, he had left me an arsenal. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice now humming with a newfound energy. "My instinct is to call him and unleash hell." "No," Arthur said firmly. "That's what he would expect. Emotion is a weapon that can be used against you. We will use logic, law, and the element of surprise. He thinks you are isolated, helpless, and emotionally distraught. We will let him continue to believe that for a little while longer. It will make his fall that much harder. Do you have a place you can go? A friend's house?" "No," I said, thinking fast. "That's the first place he'd look. I need to be invisible." "Leave it to me," Arthur said. "For now, sit tight. Do not answer his calls. Do not respond to his texts. Let him stew in the silence. The first thing a bully does when their victim doesn't react is panic. We'll let him panic. I'm going to make one phone call. The first shot across the bow is about to be fired." "What is it?" I asked. "Mark has a corporate credit card and a joint checking account linked to the business. from which he draws a handsome monthly allowance for personal expenses. As trustee of the majority shares, you are the ultimate authority over the company's finances. As of 10 minutes from now, that account will be frozen by your order. Let's see how he enjoys a taste of his own medicine, being cut off without a word. A slow, grim smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a century. The first move. It was quiet, it was surgical, and it was perfect. Thank you, Arthur, I said. Tell me when it's done. It's already done, Eleanor, he replied. Welcome back to the land of the living. The next 48 hours in that cabin were a masterclass in psychological transformation. The dilapidated shack, which had at first been my prison, slowly became my sanctuary, my war room. The isolation that was meant to break me instead became my greatest asset. It gave me the silence I needed to think, to plan, and to shed the skin of the woman I had been. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the grieving widow. I was General Vance, planning a campaign from a remote command post. I rationed my phone's battery, turning it on only for brief periods to check for messages from Arthur, always returning to the one spot by the window that offered a fragile connection to the outside world. The rest of the time, I engaged in a ritual of quiet defiance. I found a bucket, filled it with rainwater, and washed my face and hands. I took out Candace's pathetic offering of a romance novel and used a few of its pages to kindle a small, smoky fire in the rusty old stove. The warmth did little to heat the room, but it was a symbolic victory. I was creating my own light, my own heat. I explored every inch of the cabin, not with fear, but with a forensic curiosity. I found a box of old taxidermy supplies, a stack of Robert's grandfather's hunting magazines from the 1960s, and a half-empty bottle of surprisingly well-preserved whiskey. I poured a small amount into a dusty glass I'd rinsed out, the fiery liquid a stark contrast to the cloying, sweet tea Candace always insisted on serving me. It tasted like rebellion. Arthur's plan was working perfectly. He advised me to remain in the cabin, to let Mark and Candace believe they had me exactly where they wanted me. Let them get comfortable in their treachery, his text message read. Hubris is a fatal flaw. Meanwhile, he was a whirlwind of legal activity on my behalf. The first strike, the frozen bank account, had been a resounding success. Arthur painted a picture for me in a brief, encrypted email. Mark had apparently attempted to purchase a $2,000 espresso machine. The kind of casual, thoughtless purchase that had defined his life. His card was declined. He tried another. Also declined. Arthur described, with no small amount of satisfaction, the report he received from a contact at the bank. Mark had become belligerent, demanding to speak to a manager, shouting that there must be some mistake, that he was Mark Vance. The manager had calmly informed him that the account had been frozen by the primary signatory. By me. The beauty of it was that he couldn't possibly understand how I could have done it. In his mind, I was miles away in a technological dead zone, grieving and knitting, completely helpless. He must have assumed it was a bank error, a bureaucratic mix-up that would soon be resolved. He wouldn't suspect my hand in it yet. But the seed of doubt had been planted. While I waited, I made a list. Using the back of a dusty hunting magazine and a pencil stub I found in a drawer, I wrote down everything I wanted for my new life. It started with simple things. A good cup of coffee, a clean, warm bed, a door that locks, but as I wrote, the list grew more ambitious. Sell the house, fire Mark, travel to Italy. Alone start a foundation in Robert's name, for young architects. It wasn't a list of revenge. It was a blueprint for a life. A life that was entirely my own, unburdened by the expectations and demands of others. I wasn't just taking back what was mine, I was creating something new from the ashes of my old life. I felt a strange and profound sense of peace. The grief for Robert was still there, a deep, resonant ache in my soul, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was becoming a part of me, a source of strength, a memory of a love so powerful it had reached across the veil of death to arm me for this final battle. He would not have wanted me to crumble. He would have wanted me to fight. He had built the fortress, it was my duty to defend it. On the morning of the third day, a text from Arthur came through. Phase 2 is in motion. A car will be at the end of the dirt road at 1,400 hours. The driver's name is Thomas. Do not return to your house. I have booked a suite for you at the Beaumont Hotel under the name Ms. Annabelle Price. Your war room has been upgraded. I looked around the filthy cabin one last time. It had been my crucible. I had entered it a broken woman, and I was leaving it a warrior. I packed my small suitcase, carefully folding the clothes Candace had chosen for my exile. I would burn them later. I left the empty whiskey bottle on the rickety table, a silent testament to my stay. As I walked down the dirt track toward my extraction point, I didn't look back. There was nothing for me there, but the ghost of a woman I no longer was. The phone calls started on the second day. The first was a single, missed call from Mark. I watched the screen light up from across the cabin, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum. I felt nothing. No anxiety, no anger, just a cold, clinical detachment. A scientist observing a specimen. An hour later, he called again. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then a text message appeared. Mom, just checking in. Hope you're getting settled. The peace and quiet will do you good. Call me when you get this. It was so condescending, so dripping with false sincerity, it was almost comical. He was checking a box, performing the role of the good son, likely so he could tell Candace he'd done his duty. He still had no idea about the espresso machine. He was living in a state of blissful ignorance, constructing a narrative of my peaceful decline while his own financial legs were being cut out from under him. The real fun began that evening. My phone, which I'd been nursing back to life with a small solar charger I'd found in Robert's old emergency kit in the car, buzzed incessantly. A string of texts from Mark. Mom, are you getting these? Your phone must be off. Call me, something weird is going on with the bank. Need to talk to you about the accounts. It's probably just a mix-up since Dad passed. Seriously, Mom, call me. I can't get anything sorted without your signature. The tone shifted from feigned concern to undisguised annoyance. I was no longer a dear mother in need of rest. I was an administrative bottleneck. His problem-solving skills, I noted, were non-existent. His first impulse wasn't to investigate, or to think critically. It was to find the person he'd always relied on to fix things, me. Then Candace joined the fray. Her texts were an art form of passive aggression. Eleanor, darling, we're getting a little worried. Mark is so stressed, and you know how he gets. We just want to know you're safe and sound in your cozy little cabin, cozy little cabin. The phrase was so outrageously false it made me laugh out loud, a harsh, rusty sound in the quiet room. It was a lie designed to be repeated to others, to become part of the official story. The poor dear, all alone in her cozy little cabin, I could hear it now. Another text from her an hour later. Mark says there's some trouble with the cards. I hope you haven't done something silly, Eleanor. The finances can be so confusing. We're here to help, you just need to let us. There it was again. The infantilization. The suggestion that I was a doddering fool who might have done something silly, like a child who'd lost their lunch money. They were so blinded by their own narrative of my incompetence that they couldn't conceive of any other reality. They couldn't imagine that the silly thing I had done was a calculated, strategic move executed with chilling precision. They were playing checkers, moving their pieces with predictable, entitled arrogance. I was playing chess, and I was 3 moves ahead. My silence was my most powerful weapon. It created a vacuum, and their panic rushed in to fill it. Every unanswered call, every unread text, chipped away at their confidence. Their world, which had always been so stable and predictable, propped up by my labor and Robert's money, was beginning to tilt on its axis. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. I pictured them in their gleaming, minimalist mansion, a house bought with money I had helped earn. I saw Mark pacing on the imported marble floors, his phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of growing frustration. I saw Candace, reclining on a white linen sofa, composing her manipulative texts, her perfectly manicured brow furrowed with performative concern. They were trapped in their gilded cage, completely unaware that the real power was sitting in a rotting cabin miles away, watching their predictable little drama unfold on a tiny screen. They thought they had cut me off from the world. In reality, they had just given me a front-row seat to the spectacular implosion of their own. For the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. The drive to the city with Thomas, Arthur's driver, was silent and smooth. He was a discreet professional, who simply nodded when I got in and didn't speak a word, a blessed relief after the cacophony of unanswered calls and texts. Arriving at the Beaumont Hotel was like stepping into another dimension. The lobby was a symphony of quiet luxury, polished marble, fresh flowers, and the hushed tones of well-heeled guests. After the squalor of the cabin, it was an almost overwhelming sensory experience. The suite Arthur had booked for me was magnificent, with a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was my new base of operations, and it was perfect. The first thing I did was take a long, hot shower, washing away the grime and the psychic residue of the cabin. As the water sluiced over me, I felt like I was shedding a skin, letting the last vestiges of the meek, accommodating Eleanor wash down the drain. The woman who emerged, wrapped in a thick, white bathrobe, was someone new. Someone formidable. Arthur arrived an hour later, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He greeted me not with pity, but with a firm handshake and a look of profound respect. "You look like you're ready for battle, Eleanor," he said with a small smile. "I was born ready, Arthur," I replied. I just forgot for a few decades. We sat at the large mahogany desk in the suite's living area. He opened his briefcase, and it was like watching a master strategist lay out his battle plans. He had been busy. He presented me with a stack of documents, each one a legal missile aimed directly at the heart of Mark and Candace's world. "First," he said, tapping a thick sheaf of papers. "This is a formal notice of termination for Mark Vance from his position as president of Vance Construction, effective immediately. It cites gross misconduct and dereliction of fiduciary duty to the majority shareholder." "That's you." I took the pen he offered, my hand perfectly steady, and signed my name with a flourish. The ink was a deep, satisfying black. "Second," he continued, sliding another document in front of me. "A restraining order. It will prevent him and his wife from coming within 500 feet of you, your residence, or your place of business. It cites emotional distress and unlawful confinement." I signed it. "Third, this is an official notice to the board of directors, which you now control, informing them of the leadership change. It also initiates a full forensic audit of the company's books for the last 5 years. If Mark has been as careless with the company's money as he is with his own, we'll find it." I signed that too. Each signature felt like a hammer blow, dismantling the life they had tried to steal from me. "Fourth, and this one is my personal favorite," Arthur said, a glint in his eye. "This is a listing agreement with a commercial real estate agent to sell the head office building of Vance Construction. It's prime real estate, and the building itself is owned by your personal holding company, not the business. The business has been paying you rent for years, something I'm sure Mark was never aware of. We are going to liquidate the asset and move the company to a more modest, rented space. The capital will go directly to you." My eyebrows shot up. "Robert, you magnificent, cunning man." I signed. "And finally," Arthur said, pushing the last document forward. "The house. Your home." I've taken the liberty of contacting a locksmith. The locks will be changed this afternoon. And this is a listing agreement with Sotheby's. Not the local agent Candace plays tennis with, who has no doubt been promised the commission. We are going to sell it, Eleanor. And you're going to take the money, and do whatever you damn well please with it. I paused before signing this one, a flicker of sentimentality stirring within me. 40 years of my life were in that house. Robert's favorite armchair. The pencil marks on the doorframe measuring Mark's height. But then I pictured Candace walking through it, mentally redecorating, earmarking my possessions for an estate sale. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a prize they felt they had won. Selling it wasn't an act of loss, it was an act of liberation. I signed the last paper. What happens now? I asked. Now, Arthur said, gathering the documents, the dominoes begin to fall. Mark is about to have the worst day of his life. The escalation was swift. Mark, finding his corporate accounts frozen, must have driven to the office, intending to use his authority there to solve the problem. He would have been met by security, who would have had a crisp, formal letter informing him he was no longer an employee, and was not to set foot on the property. His keys and access cards would have been deactivated. Panicked, he would have driven to the house, our house, the one constant in his life, the ultimate safety net. He would have found his key useless in the lock. While he was rattling the doorknob, a courier would have arrived to serve him with the restraining order. Imagine the scene, my son, the self-proclaimed king, locked out of his castle and his kingdom in the space of a few hours. His universe, so carefully curated and controlled, was shattering around him. His panic, which had been a low hum of annoyance, would now be a full-throated scream of disbelief and rage. My phone, which I'd left on the desk, began to vibrate violently, skittering across the polished wood. It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. Then Candace. Then Mark again. Then a barrage of texts, each more frantic than the last. What did you do? They kicked me out of my own company. The locks are changed. Where are you? Mom, this isn't funny. You're ruining everything Dad built. Candace is having a panic attack. You need to fix this now. I read them all with the detached calm of a meteorologist watching a storm she had accurately predicted. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a tantrum, a temporary madness they could fix. They still saw me as the variable, the problem to be solved, not the architect of their ruin. Arthur stood up, a satisfied look on his face. I believe they are now ready for a conversation, he said. Shall we grant them an audience? They found me, of course. Panic is a powerful motivator. They must have called every hotel in the city, using their sob story of a confused, grieving mother who had wandered off. Eventually, some sympathetic desk clerk must have broken the rules and confirmed the name Eleanor Vance was in the system, even though I was registered as Miss Price. Arthur had anticipated this. He had instructed the hotel staff that if a Mr. and Mrs. Vance arrived, they were to be asked to wait in the main lobby, and that I would be informed. He advised me to meet them there, on neutral ground. A public space is a cage for people like them, he'd explained. They are slaves to appearances. They will not be able to cause a scene. I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple but elegant silk blouse and tailored trousers, clothes I had bought myself that afternoon on a brief shopping trip. I put on the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw not a victim, but a CEO. A woman in control. I walked down to the lobby, my posture erect, my steps measured and calm. I saw them immediately. They were huddled together on a velvet sofa, a stark island of frantic energy in the sea of tranquility. Mark was a mess. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled. His face was pale and blotchy with rage and anxiety. Candace was next to him, her face a theatrical mask of distress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, She looked up and saw me first, her jaw tightening. Mark followed her gaze, and his eyes widened, first with relief, and then with fury as he took in my composed appearance. I was not the broken, confused woman he had left at the cabin. I was his judge. I walked toward them and sat in an armchair opposite the sofa, creating a deliberate space between us. I placed my hands calmly in my lap and waited. "Mom?" Mark burst out, his voice a harsh whisper, mindful of the other guests. "What in God's name is going on? What have you done?" I looked at him, my expression unreadable. "I believe the question is, Mark, what have you done?" Candace jumped in, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "Eleanor, we were so worried. We drove all the way out to the cabin to check on you this morning and you were gone. We thought something terrible had happened." "Did you?" I asked, my voice quiet, but carrying an edge of steel. "Or did you go out there to confirm that your plan was working? To see if I had broken yet?" Mark leaned forward, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "This is insane. You fired me from my own company. You're selling our house. Dad's house. He would be rolling in his grave." "Your father," I said, my voice dropping to a clinical, precise tone, "is the one who put these measures in place. He put the house, the investments, and a controlling interest in the company solely in my name for one reason, to protect them from you. From your greed and your entitlement. It seems his judgment of your character was more accurate than mine ever was." The color drained from Mark's face. He looked at Candace, then back at me, utter disbelief warring with dawning horror. "That's not true," he stammered. "Dad trusted me with everything." "No," I corrected him gently. "He trusted me. He gave you a job, a generous salary, and a lifestyle you did not earn. He gave you opportunities. And how did you repay him? The moment he was gone, you took his grieving wife, your own mother, and you abandoned her in a derelict cabin to seize his assets. That is not concern. That is a crime." Here it came, the pivot to emotional manipulation. "We did it for you," Candace cried, her voice rising. "We were worried about you. All alone in that big house, so sad and confused. We wanted you to have peace." I leveled my gaze at her, and for the first time, she flinched. "Let's be honest, Candace. Was the house too big and sad for me? Or was its market value just right for you? Were you worried about my fragile emotional state, or were you worried I might live another 30 years and spend what you considered to be your inheritance?" I turned back to Mark. "If you had known I was the majority shareholder of the company, would you still have suggested I retire to a life of quiet poverty? If you had known the house was legally mine to sell, would you have been so quick to change the locks?" The rhetorical questions hung in the air, unanswerable and devastating. They had no defense because I was speaking the absolute truth, a truth they had hidden even from themselves. Mark finally broke. "Okay, fine," he hissed, his voice cracking. "Fine. It was a mistake. We went too far. I'm sorry. Now, please, just fix it. Call the lawyer, undo all of this. We can go back to how things were." I almost laughed. Go back? There was no going back. The person he was talking to, the woman who would have accepted that hollow apology and smoothed everything over, no longer existed. "There is no fixing this, Mark," I said calmly. "There is no undoing. This is not a mistake. It is a consequence. You are out of the company. You are out of the house. You are out of my life. I have instructed my lawyer to transfer the deed to a single property into your name, free and clear. It's the hunting cabin. And the 10 acres it sits on. I believe you told me it was my new home. Now, it's yours. I hope you find it simple and manageable." He stared at me, his mouth agape. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The sheer, brutal justice of it was something his mind couldn't process. Candace let out a small, strangled sob. "You can't do this to us," she whispered. "We are family." "You stopped being my family the moment you left me on that rotting porch," I said, standing up. "You taught me a very valuable lesson, you too. You taught me that love and loyalty cannot be taken for granted. And you taught me the difference between a mother and a fortress. A mother nurtures and gives, endlessly. A fortress defends its borders. The mother is gone. You are now speaking to the fortress. And the gates are closed." I turned without another word and walked away, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own making. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their stunned silence following me all the way to the elevator. The aftermath was not a storm, but a quiet, steady rain. Mark and Candace, stripped of their power and resources, tried to fight back, of course. They hired a lawyer who made loud, empty threats about contesting Robert's will and filing a lawsuit for emotional distress. A truly breathtaking act of hypocrisy. Arthur swatted their attempts away like flies. Robert's planning had been too meticulous, my legal position too ironclad. Their case was laughed out of every preliminary hearing. The social fallout for them was, from what I heard, devastating. The story, in its unvarnished truth, began to circulate. Not from me, I never spoke a word of it publicly, but through the quiet channels of lawyers and board members and real estate agents. The narrative of the caring son and the confused mother collapsed, replaced by the shocking reality. Friends stopped returning their calls. Invitations to galas and fundraisers dried up. They became social ghosts, haunted by the spectre of their own cruelty. I, on the other hand, was embarking on a renaissance. The process of dismantling my old life was profoundly cathartic. Selling the big house wasn't sad, it felt like taking off a heavy coat I'd been wearing for decades. I went through its rooms, not with nostalgia, but with a curator's eye. I kept the things that held real love, Robert's worn armchair, a handful of photographs, the books we had read together. The rest, the expensive furniture Candace had picked out, the sterile art, the symbols of a life lived for appearances, was sold. The proceeds were staggering. With Arthur's help, I reinvested some, but I used a significant portion to do something I had dreamed of for years. I started the Robert Vance Foundation for Architectural Innovation, a grant program for young, talented students who lacked the funds to pursue their dreams. I would not let another person's passion be put away in a box. I sold the Vance construction headquarters and moved the company to a sleek, modern, and much smaller office space. I promoted Robert's second-in-command, a sharp and loyal woman named Maria, to president. She had been with the company for 20 years, her talent consistently overlooked by Mark. Under her leadership, the company thrived. And for myself, I bought a beautiful penthouse apartment downtown. It wasn't as large as my old house, but it was mine in a way that house had never been. It had floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the entire city, a kitchen designed for one, and a small studio space with a drafting table, a gift I gave to myself. I started sketching again, designing fantastical buildings and dream homes, not for any client, but for the sheer joy of creation. I reconnected with old friends, the ones Mark and Candace had subtly pushed away because they weren't important enough. I had long lunches that stretched into afternoons, filled with laughter and genuine conversation. I was no longer just a wife or a mother. I was Eleanor again, a person with her own thoughts, her own interests, her own life. 6 months after the funeral, I boarded a plane. My destination, Rome. I was finally taking the trip Robert and I had always planned. I went alone, but I wasn't lonely. I walked through the ancient streets, his memory not a weight, but a warm presence beside me. I felt he would be proud. He had built me a fortress to survive a war, but he had also given me the keys to a kingdom of my own making. One evening, I sat at a small cafe in a quiet piazza, sipping a glass of wine and watching the world go by. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert from back home. Mark and Candace were selling their mansion. They were downsizing. Drastically. A grim, quiet satisfaction settled over me, but it wasn't triumph. It was simply the universe balancing its books. They had their simpler, more manageable life now. Just as they had planned. Only it was their life, not mine. The bitterness was gone, washed away by the tide of my new life. I felt peaceful. I felt free. I felt whole. I raised my glass in a silent toast, to Robert, for his love and his foresight, and to myself, for having the strength to turn the key he had left me. I'm sitting now in my apartment, in Robert's armchair, which fits perfectly in the corner by the window. The city lights glitter below me like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It's quiet here, but it's a good quiet. The silence of peace, not the silence of abandonment. For so long, I defined myself by my relationships to other people. I was Robert's wife. I was Mark's mother. Those were my primary roles, the titles that gave me my identity. When Robert died, and Mark betrayed me, I felt like I had been completely erased, because the pillars that held up my sense of self had crumbled. But they were wrong. I was not the house they wanted to sell, or the bank account they wanted to drain, or the problem they wanted to hide. I was the foundation upon which all of it was built. They mistook the foundation for the doormat, and when they tried to wipe their feet on me, they found I was made of solid rock. My story isn't really about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion, and what I feel now is the cool, clean clarity of justice. It's about reclaiming a narrative. My son and his wife tried to write the final chapter of my life for me. They cast me as the tragic, helpless widow, fading into quiet obscurity. They didn't realize I was the author of the entire story, and I was fully capable of writing a new ending. An ending where the matriarch doesn't fade away, but finally, for the first time, steps into the spotlight. I learned that family is not a word that demands blind sacrifice. True family is a bond of mutual respect, of love that gives without expecting servitude in return. It's a safe harbor, not a cage. And love, real love, doesn't diminish you. It doesn't ask you to fold up your dreams and put them in a box. It builds you a fortress and trusts you with the keys. They tried to put me in a box, a rotting, wooden box in the middle of nowhere. But they forgot one crucial thing. I was the one who knew its true value. I was the one who held the deed. They thought my life was over the day they closed my husband's casket and drove me away. They couldn't have been more wrong. That was the day my real life finally began. So, I'll leave you with this question. What would you have done? When have you been underestimated, and how did you find the strength to remind the world, and more importantly, yourself, of who you truly are? Let me know your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. And if my story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. Because every single one of us has a fortress inside, and a story of strength that deserves to be told.